I'm sorry that I don't have an accent for you. My name's Ivan Easton. I'm the director of the Center for International Trade and Forest Products in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences in the College of the Environment at the University of Washington. I'm going to be talking a little bit, I talked to Craig about this before. We're going to give a little summary of what's going on in Japan. How many people here have done projects in Japan or are at least familiar with the construction industry in Japan? Anybody? So just a couple. So things don't happen fast in Japan. Building codes don't change very quickly. Fire codes don't change very quickly. Nothing changes very quickly in Japan. And so this is really kind of an amazing case study when we talk about the CLT industry in Japan, because in 2010, if you had talked to someone, a builder in Japan, about CLT, you would have gotten a blank stare. Today, a lot of people know about CLT, and there's a lot of excitement about CLT in Japan. And so what I want to do is kind of show you how that happened. But before I do that, I have to show you my own roadmap. So this presentation is about the CLT roadmap. But first, here's the roadmap we're going to go through. And I'm going to talk about the dilemma in the forestry side and the sawmill side, because you really have to understand what's going on within the wood products sector and the forestry sector to understand why the roadmap for CLT was adopted. So I'll do that very quickly, and then we'll go on to the CLT roadmap. And I'll walk you through the CLT roadmap and show you kind of how that process has gone through and how it was developed. So first of all, the forestry dilemma. And I've got just one or two slides on each of these to kind of just set the stage to give you a feel for what's going on. Each one of these could probably take a 20 to 30-minute presentation just to make sure that you understand what's going on. But basically, 2/3 of Japan is covered in forest. And for a lot of people, they don't really understand how many trees there are in Japan. So Japan is about the size of California, and it's covered in trees. Most of those trees were planted after World War II. So at the end of World War II, there's virtually no trees in Japan, and they were all replanted at once. So timber age is relatively uniform. Timber quality is relatively low because those forests weren't managed. They were put into the ground and then just kind of left there. Forest inventory has doubled since 1980, so there's about 4.8 billion cubic meters of wood sitting in the landscape. That's 2 trillion board feet for the wood products folks here who have a challenge with cubic meters. 51% of the forests are over 50 years old, and so they're ready to be harvested. 75% of the private forests are less than 5 hectares. So already you can see that there's a challenge here. You've got small forests. They're old. They're ready to be harvested. Most of them are in the mountains, and there aren't any roads to them. So there's huge costs associated with timber harvesting in Japan. Since 1980, stumpage prices are down by 83%, while wages are up by 61%. Those of you in the forestry side can see the challenge here already. And the number of forestry workers has dropped from 450,000 in 1960 to just 80,000 today. Young people don't want to go into those jobs. They're called the 3 Ds, dirty, dangerous, and demanding. But even more important, they aren't in Tokyo. They're out in the hinterland, and young people don't want to be out in the prefectures. They want to be in Tokyo. So over 45% of forestry workers are over 55 years old. So the bottom line here is you have an industry that's dominated by small, non-resident forest owners who tend not to harvest their forest because there's a negative internal rate of return associated with forest management and timber harvest. So this picture right here can summarize everything for you. You can see stumpage prices have plunged since 1980, and you can see that labor costs have gone up relatively quickly. So the internal rate of return for harvesting either sugi or hinoki, the main species in Japan, is negative right now. So without subsidies, you can't harvest trees. So let's jump over to the sawmill sector and see what's going on there. So remember, I said that Japan is about the size of California. So and right now, there are over 5,400 sawmills in Japan. If we had gone back to 1980, there was over 20,000 sawmills. Can you think of 20,000 sawmills just in the state of California? That's a lot of sawmills. Most of these are really small. They call these mom and pop kind of sawmills. Over 2/3 of them have less than 5 workers. Average lumber production is about 2,000 cubic meters per mill, but that's skewed by some of the bigger mills. It's actually quite small, a lot lower than that for some of these small mom and pop operations. So the number of sawmills has fallen, so you know that you're going to have consolidation with the industry, and you can see that consolidation is happening, but there's still a lot more consolidation that needs to go on. Lumber production has fallen 74%. The prices of lumber have plunged since 1980. So again, the same thing that we saw with stumpage. And then as a result of some of the subsidies programs that are going on, we can see that Sugi and Hinoki prices since 2010 have just started to come back a little bit, but they're still nowhere near where you can be highly profitable. The bottom line is, again, we have an industry dominated by small, unproductive sawmills using old, inefficient machinery, and they just don't compete against imported wood, against European wood, Canadian wood, US wood. So, faced with that dilemma and knowing that they need to get the wood out of the forest, Japan has, and they can't do it profitably, so Japan has tried to kind of square the circle by putting in place a number of subsidy policies. And I'm going to run you through those very quickly here. So there's really, this is just since 2009, there's 9 subsidy programs that have been used. The Forestry and Revitalization Plan, they've pumped about $7 billion, that's dollars, into this program to help subsidize the cost of building roads in the mountains to the forest, harvesting the trees, and replanting the trees. So for a forest owner, they basically don't have to do anything. The entire operation is subsidized for them. The second program is called 200-Year House Program. And this is an effort from the Japanese government to try and address the fact that houses in Japan are looked at as a commodity. And after about 25 years, the lifespan is over, houses are ripped down and then rebuilt. And the Japanese government is trying to push folks to look at these more as a long-term investment and to invest in higher quality housing. Wood use in public buildings law is an effort to get public buildings built out of wood. Over the past few years, there's been an emphasis on using more domestic species in those projects. And since 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, the last year we have data for, about 85 to 88% of the wood used in those projects has been domestic wood. There's a wood use points program. That was about, there's a feed-in tariff program, and we aren't going to deal with that. That's a bioenergy project. Wood use points program was an effort to use more domestic wood in housing. We were successful in getting U.S. Douglas fir designated as a local wood species in Japan. So actually, under that wood use points program, you could actually use U.S. Douglas fir for those projects and still get the subsidy that went with using domestic wood. And then there's a few other programs, stepped up plywood and lumber production program that we're dealing with right now, the timber legality regulation, and then the CLT roadmap. But basically, the common elements across all these programs are there's substantial subsidies provided to increase the use of domestic wood, and that is actively promoted and emphasized. So here's what the revitalization plan looks like. The goal of the revitalization plan is 50% self-sufficiency. You can see that from the dotted line. It doesn't look like they're going to make it. They revised the plan now, and the goal was originally to be at 50% self-sufficiency by 2020. Now the goal is to be at 50% self-sufficiency by 2025. You can see in that red circle, that's kind of where they're going to be the next few years, and then the line after that blue circle goes pretty steep. So it doesn't look like they're probably going to make that goal either, even though that goal actually hasn't been published yet. It'll come out later on this year. So finally, the CLT roadmap. So the Japanese, looking at using more wood, more domestic wood, have latched on to CLT as one way to really push this forward. And the entire industry, government, everybody has gotten behind this. And here's a poster showing CLT can be used to revitalize rural areas. And this is what the roadmap looks like. And I'm going to walk you through this roadmap. This roadmap was developed in collaboration between the government, MLIT, Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transportation, the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, the Forestry Agency, academics, wood processing industry, prefectures, and industry associations. They all convened under the government's direction to put together this roadmap to get from a point where CLT couldn't be used at all in Japan prior to 2014. By 2016, it will be routine to be able to use CLT, and you will have an industry that is started with CLT manufacturing facilities in play, and subsidies provided to help put those CLT plants on the ground. So the first step for them was to collect the design information using Japanese species. That's a 3-year effort, and based on that, they will change the building codes. And the goal is not only to change the building codes to allow you to use wood in the entire structure, but also to use it in floor systems, wall systems, whole buildings, seismic retrofits, and remodel applications. So they're looking at it for a wide variety of different types of applications. The second part of the CLT roadmap was, again, collecting performance data that would allow you to do 3 to 4 story CLT structures without obtaining a ministerial approval. A ministerial approval means that you're using a type of construction technology that isn't approved under the building code, so you have to put together the structural calculations for that project, take it to the ministry, get approval for that, special approval for that before you can start to build. The goal is to have low-rise buildings approved under the building code with no kind of ministerial approval. That is a huge change for Japan. And to have that happen in 3 years, man, that's almost warp speed. Then they had to do the burning test. This is a huge issue for Japan. Japanese cities are kind of broken into 3 zones. The fire zone in the core of the city, quasi-fire zone on the outside, and then a non-fire zone out in the suburbs. They want to be able to build these structures in the fire zones. And so they're going through collecting the data on the 3-story CLT structures. Actually, in May of this year, you'll be able to build those 3-story wood structures in fire zones. And now they're starting to look, and the next step, they're looking at, okay, how do we get approval for these different types of systems? So the first one is floor systems that can be used in hybrid type structures. The next would be wall systems that are used in hybrid structures. And then seismic retrofits. So they have built a 7-story, I think it was a 7-story structure out of CLT, put it on the shake table, and shook the heck out of it, and looked at how it performed. And then they set it on fire to see how the fire test would perform. How do you get folks, though, to start using this stuff? And this is where they came in with a really, really strong program to disseminate information across builders, developers, architects, to get them to understand how to use CLT, why CLT is useful, and they've started putting in some construction projects. So up to date, there have been 21 construction projects that have been built in Japan. There's a number that are under construction now. I'll show you just a couple of them. It'll be nowhere near as sophisticated as the projects that you saw earlier, but this is a way of educating the public and educating builders about CLT. So here's a project that used about 42 cubic meters of CLT. Another project here, 40 cubic meters of CLT. This is the housing for workers. This is an information booth, and then the last one is a bus stop. So they're using it in a variety of different end uses, trying to get folks familiar with what CLT is and how it can be used, and allowing designers to use a little bit of their imagination to come up with projects. Here's the big one. So to get this industry going, the Japanese government will provide 50% subsidies to put the manufacturing facility in place. So if you agreed to put in place a CLT manufacturing facility, up to 50% of the cost of that can be subsidized by the Japanese government. And under the roadmap, the plan is to put in place one 50,000 cubic meter production facility every year for 10 years. The first one's already been built, the second one's under construction. And the plans are in place for the next 8 after that. And so by 2025, there will be 500,000 cubic meters of production capacity for CLT in place in Japan, half of which has been subsidized by the government. And then finally, the last component of the CLT plan was to develop these seminars and workshops to work with construction professionals to adopt and diffuse this technology across the construction sector. So, next to last slide, and then it's lunch. What was the goal of the overall goal of the CLT roadmap? First and foremost, increased demand for sugi and hinoki. Those are the two major species. 85% of what grows in Japan is sugi and hinoki. They want to increase wood demand and wood use. In the commercial building sector, it hasn't been used there very much. They need to revise the fire and building codes. That will be done by the end of 2016. They already did the full-size fire and seismic testing. Build the CLT demonstration structures. 21 are done. More are under construction. Put in place the CLT manufacturing capacity. The goal is to reduce CLT from its current price, which is about 150,000 yen per cubic meters, cut it by more than half, down to about 70,000 cubic meters. And at that point, they feel it'll be competitive with concrete and steel. And then the goal, again, is to achieve a 6% share of mid-rise buildings, up to 4 stories, and to be able to do up to 7 stories with an MLIT ministerial approval. So you can do 3 to 4 stories without the approval, and hopefully up to 7 stories with an approval. So some strategic issues to take a look at. There may be some opportunities for Doug fir lamb stock. Certainly on a glue lamb side, it's already been approved there. And in fact, there's a product called a hybrid beam that uses Douglas fir on the faces of that glue laminated beam and sugi in the interior part where the strength isn't as critical. It probably won't be approved for use for CLT panels for quite a while. The government has indicated that it'll be a few years before they even consider foreign species for CLT panels, focusing primarily on sugi and hinoki. There's a lot of new markets for wood in Japan: public buildings, schools, bioenergy, and in the future, CLT. And so we still see Japan being an important market for US wood products in the future. And the challenge is, since these subsidies are disadvantageous to North American wood, how do we work with the Japanese to try and address those? So thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully we left a couple of minutes for questions.